Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers. Oh, hello. Hey, Brewer fans, how you doing? Milwaukee Brewers had a fine week. We'll discuss that on today's podcast. With me today is Scott and Vince. How you guys doing?
Hey,
Craig, how are you? You guys, great. And I know we did extend an invite to a longtime Brewer Crew Review colleague, Chad Collins. Did he confirm or deny whether or not he would call in from his cell phone from a Porygon at the Wisconsin State Fair tonight, or did he against that?
Yeah, I talked to Chad. He just said that he was at State Fair. Sorry, guys. Downface emoticon. He just was unable to make it, apparently, because he's occupied at State Fair. He's sampling food for our hosts here at the Brew Crew Review, and I'm sure he'll get back to us on next week's podcast with a scouting report.
Awesome.
So we can all look forward to that. And podcast
Excellent.
number 36.
Excellent. Okay, well, this is podcast number 35, and it is entitled Stearns Did It. We believe it. That settles it. And we're going to talk about how the we in that statement refers to Brewer fan. And we're going to talk about how David Stearns somehow has reached deity status as the GM of the Milwaukee, as a young GM of the Milwaukee Brewers. And people do not question any moves that he does, and they assume that they're all completely brilliant. So
we love the leader. That was from The Simpsons.
We will confirm or deny that. But before we do that, let's quick wrap up this past week in Brewer baseball, as we still are in contention, of course, for a playoff race, and we're the leading NL wild card by a couple of games here as we enter this podcast. And basically this past week, we did have 4 games in Los Angeles against Dodgers. We didn't end up pulling that series. And we had 3 home games against the Colorado Rockies, and we did win that series 2 out of 3. So we were 4-3 on the week, which, again, not too bad, all things considered, against some pretty quality opponents. And, yeah, I guess before we do anything else, what are your guys' thoughts on this past week in Brewer baseball?
Yeah, it was a good week, guys. I was pretty excited. I thought that the Brewers played well, at least the first 2 games of the series in Los Angeles. We've, all been fans for a long time, and we have, I think, seen in years past why it's okay to dread a West Coast road trip for the Brewers. Between winning several games in San Francisco and then winning 2 of 4 in Los Angeles, I was pretty exuberant, really, with the Brewers' results on that road trip. I think that we played the Dodgers pretty heads up. The series against the Rockies, I thought the Brewers looked outstanding. A nice come-from-behind victory on Friday night. And unfortunately, the results didn't turn out the way that we wanted to on Sunday. Got the game tied in the 9th, went to extra innings, and then Sucked able to blow another save. But overall, yeah, it was a great series. It saw a lot of passion from the team and from the fans at home over the weekend. So that was great to see.
Yeah, I think I would say it was definitely a good West Coast trip. Obviously, 4-3 on the road trip, but it had a potential to be a really, really great road trip, and it just wasn't. We won the first 2 games in LA, but then we dropped the last 2, move on to the Rockies, win the first 2 games, and drop the last one. So, I don't know. There was road trip and homestand, whatever, the last week. But overall, there was just so much more potential. This could have been a huge – we could have actually snuck out of there with, 5 or 6 wins instead of just 4. But, it is what it is.
Yeah, there's been some talk about letting up on the last game of the series. You guys see that? I know that for a lot of Brewer fans, that memory goes back to, Craig, one of your favorites, Ned Yost. And he was our manager of the quote-unquote Sunday lineups, where he would seemingly start Trent Durringtons and Chris Magruders of the world. And I don't know. I don't think the council quite falls into that category. I know we've talked about it on our podcast before, but do you guys think the Brewers are letting up, so to speak, on the last game of the series throughout the season?
I don't want to say that they're letting up. I just think, players are creatures of habit just like everybody else. They have a routine, and maybe, I don't know, maybe the routine is just I'll have a much better routine for night games than they do day games because day games are terrible. What are we now, like 4-14 on Sundays, which is pretty terrible considering our record.
You can have your intern, Sarah, look that up for you, Scott.
Yeah, we basically win almost 2 out of 3 games. Any game that's not like a Sunday. But
yeah,
what can you do?
Yeah, that's a good point. It just seems like, I don't think the council's trotting out a terribly weak lineup on Sundays a lot of times, but it does seem as though it's just been a fact. It's been very difficult for us to win on Sundays or final games of series. So it's just odd. I don't know if there's anything to it, but it could just be random. I'm not sure.
Craig, what do you think? What are your thoughts on all this?
We may have lost Craigers here.
Oh, no.
We're going to have to do a pause and then.
Well, hopefully.
We'll have to. Hopefully Craig can
Yeah, I don't know.
Hopefully Craig can rejoin us at some point here in the podcast. But, Scott, the Brewers trotted out several new guys here in the past week since the trading deadline. We've had obviously acquired Mike Moustakis, Jonathan Schoop, and Joakim Soria for our bullpen. How do you think these guys performed here in their first week as Brewers?
Soria is pitching very, very well. I'm actually a little disappointed. I think one of the last games of this last series, I think we trotted him out in like the 6th inning, and I'd like to see him in a little bit more of a high leverage situations, just because I think at this point he should be working more of like a 7th or even 8th inning kind of thing. But I don't know.
That brings up a great point. I don't mean to interrupt you, Scott, but that brings up a really good point. So Craig Counsell has talked now about having guys in our bullpen essentially facing or pitching according to matchups, not necessarily according to innings. So we're seeing Corey Knebel come in the 6th inning or 7th inning in a game earlier this week, and then again in the 9th and 10th inning in a game later on this week. And it's interesting to me. So that being said, I could see Soria coming in and pitching in the 8th inning or even 9th inning at some point going forward. So I don't think the council is necessarily relegating it to a 6th inning role, but maybe he was facing matchups. And do you agree with that? Do you think that it's wise to take Knebel out of the closer's role at times and play matchups, or do you think the guy should be slotted into sort of a set role in the bullpen that they're always going to be pitching the 7th inning or the 9th inning or whatever the case might be?
Yeah, I definitely like the just working with different matchups and letting the game come to you that way, using who's appropriate at the appropriate time, just because – and that seems to be like a little bit of a change in philosophy from the Brewers. I just remember some of our other good teams in years past, we would be like, this is, again, what most MLB teams do. Hey, this is our 7th inning guy, this is our 8th inning guy, and this is our closer. And teams are getting away from that as they're, maybe digging a little bit more into the metrics and saying, hey, maybe this is a good option. I remember, although it obviously worked, I remember when, we'd play the Cardinals and they would go through 10 pitchers in a game because there would be a pitching change every other at bat, and it slowed the game down and it was super annoying, but it also worked. So, yeah,
interesting
option.
Interesting point. And I do think that we're seeing the bullpen as being one area of the game that really is changing here in 2018. And you could say at the start of last season too. And it seems like the Tampa Bay Rays, who earlier this year had gone and started relievers at the beginning of the game, essentially just trying to piggyback guys back to back to back to back and throwing relievers for essentially 2 innings. Or one look through the lineup at times, and then bringing in your next reliever. So it's really redefining pitching roles. And I mean, I guess if you're looking at it at a macro level, and you're not looking at it in the traditional sense, you're really looking at say 12 guys in a pitching rotation or storage that you bring in to get outs when you need them to get the outs. So I could see it being a really interesting experiment continuing there over the next few years. I know that since the Rays kind of broke that open this spring, that other teams have tried to replicate that a little bit. I know the Blue Jays started John Axford in a game a week and a half or so ago before he was traded to the Dodgers. It's very interesting. The Brewers aren't doing that, but we are doing things like, again, bringing Corey Knebel into the sixth inning when he's been a closer throughout the last 2-3 seasons. It is interesting.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of.
I'm back. What are your guys' thoughts on how the Tampa Bay Rays are utilizing their starting rotation / pitching staff?
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about, Craig. I think Tampa is, they're obviously at the forefront of just trying this out. I don't know if enough time has progressed to give them really solid results yet. It's been a pretty small sample size. That being said, again, if you've got 12 guys to control baseball and you've got to get a certain number of opposing batters out, it could be an interesting way to play to your strengths if you've got a stronger bullpen and a weak starting rotation. So maybe the Brewers are seeing a little bit of that and essentially telling the quote-unquote starters to go 5 innings, and then we'll hand the ball off to who's ever going to be, pitching against the right batters, so to speak, and going matchups the rest of the game, and really taking away any sort of defined roles for guys in the pen. It could work, especially when you got guys like Hager in there. I tend to be more of a traditionalist with baseball, but this could be interesting. I think it does play to a certain team's strength. I don't know that every team would want to copy this, but I think that certain teams, and maybe the Brewers are among them, this could be a benefit.
I personally do not like what Tampa Bay is doing with their pitching staff, and I don't think it's going to work over the long haul. I'm fine with them because obviously they're not particularly good and not a playoff team this year and experimenting with it, but I think it's going to fail. I could see it bring about change in the future for teams that may use more of their, first of all, more of their 25-man roster spots, and I think there's been some talk that could be legitimate happening in the change of baseball rules going forward where the 25-man roster is expanded. Even as it stands as a 25 now, teams could shift and, basically have like only a 2-man bench or something with like a backup catcher and someone who could one offensive backup or something like that, and have them be able to play multiple positions or multiple players on your team have multiple positions, and then just have extra pitchers. But I don't think that starting guys with like only going 2 innings thing is gonna. I don't think it's overall good for the health of your bullpen if you're going to be winning games. But again, it's not. It's always good to try things out, and baseball's been the same for so long. Obviously, the game today is completely different. Back in just 20 years ago, there were people throwing complete games quite often on staff. That almost never happens now for pitchers to throw a complete game. In fact, I don't remember the last time a Brewer starting pitcher threw a complete game.
That's a great question. I don't remember either. I want to say Giovanni threw a couple, but I guess I could be wrong on that. I'm not positive.
I think someone threw one last year, but I don't remember it.
Freddie Peralta threw not quite a complete game, but almost a complete game in his debut performance in Colorado, if I remember correctly, earlier this season. But yeah, it's obviously very few and far between, and we're talking like once a year, if that, for some teams. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. When you think back to guys like Nolan Ryan and Jack Morris and other guys who were able to throw complete games multiple times per season.
I don't
know. Even the Brewers, I think, all Mike Caldwell, I think, back in the late 70s, threw like 22 complete games in 1 year or something ridiculous like that for the Brewers.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
Yep. And guys took pride in that. And, yeah, it's definitely different.
I was going to say there's just looked up that Jimmy Nelson threw a complete game in June of last year, and at the time it was the first complete game by a Brewer in about 2 years. So, yeah, like you said, few and far between.
Okay. All right. Was that Nelson start against San Diego last year?
I believe it was, yeah.
Yep, I remember that game.
Okay, well, kind of touching base on some other news, and I don't know, I assume when I was away for a couple minutes, you guys didn't get to this, and that was the Brewers did, as far as like waiver transactions this week, did kind of pick up a possible significant important piece, and that would be waived, of course, here in August by the San Diego Padres. Right-hand pitcher Jordan Lyles, who was kind of a swingman the last couple of years with the Padres, some starting, some relieving, almost their version of Brent Suter, so to speak, was released by them, and I think he's only making like $3 million this year, and the Brewers will be on the hook for the rest of it. And basically, the Brewers claimed him, and the Padres just had a negotiated trade. And obviously, if they were going to get something wrong, they would have done it before the trade deadline. Instead, just let the Brewers take him in his salary. Also, the rival St. Louis Cardinals did the same thing, and they were able to claim, because they're worse than us this season, have a worse record, probably had a higher waiver claim on Tyson Ross, who they got a little bit more valuable, but also more expensive. In my opinion, I actually like Jordan Lyles more than Tyson Ross, but that's just me. So what are your guys' thoughts on the addition, and whether or not this is just saving face for the fact that Stearns really didn't add to our depth of our starting pitchers before the non-waiver trade deadline ended?
I don't think that saving face has much to do with it. I don't think that Stearns really worries about what people are thinking about his plans. I will say that, the idea of just getting arms and seeing what sticks seems to kind of be what's happening here. Not many guys are necessarily available after July 31st, after the waivers process. So I think that Stearns is just going to put in claims on a number of guys and see what sticks. I guess, to look on the bright side, I guess the Lyles has got big league experience, and like you said, he can pitch from the bullpen or in the rotation if need be. And I don't see too much other upside besides that. I guess that you have to hope that maybe Derek Johnson finds something with him and he's serviceable here through the next couple of months, but I'm not expecting huge things out of this acquisition. His numbers with San Diego were pretty paltry, and if nothing else, it's just an extra arm to have an extra arm.
Scott, do you have any thoughts on Jordan Lyles?
I mean, he was drafted by Houston, so obviously Stearns knows him a little bit. But I kind of just tried to look through and look at his stats and say hey, what is he really, really good at? Is there something that he does that really stands out? And I mean, this year he's been doing a good job of getting out lefties, which is a little bit weird because he's a right-handed pitcher, but righties are still hitting over 300 against him. So I don't know what role he's going to have. Is he going to be a right-handed loogie, or what's he going to do? I don't really know. But he hasn't been very good away from Petco either, which is also a little bit concerning. So, yeah, I don't know. Right now it's possibly just a fresh arm, and hopefully he'll be able to contribute positively.
Yeah, and I guess the question becomes, is he better than other potential starting pitching options that we would have as depth in the minor leagues, guys like, Aaron Wilkerson or Brandon Woodruff? And maybe that's kind of what Stearns and Craig Counsell and Derek Johnson are going to weigh here over the next, few weeks to months. And I could see him getting some bullpen innings to start off with, and the Brewers really don't need a fifth starter for a number of weeks at least. And I could see him, kind of thrown out of the pen, seeing how he does, sort of like Suter was doing at the beginning of the year. And if there is another injury to the starting rotation, or if our starting pitching starts to falter, I guess he could be plugged in if we don't claim anybody else. But I view this as as a bullpen arm that is essentially a Brent Suter replacement for Brent Suter.
I would definitely say, he's more of an upgrade over Aaron Wilkerson, and just from his experience alone in a pennant chase. I mean, Jordan Lyles was at one point one of the top prospects in a pretty loaded Astros system. As it turned out, things didn't work out so well, and he was really highly touted mostly because of his pinpoint control. So he doesn't walk a lot of guys. He does his decent stuff. I think kind of his ERA was always inflated a little bit because he started off his career in Houston, pitching Houston. That was a little bit of a Minute Maid, a little bit of a bandbox for pitchers, and then he moved on to Colorado, and of course that's the thin air. So he did do pretty good on the Padres, and of course that might be because of the opposite effect their stadium has on pitchers. And now going back to Miller Park, well, I think most people are definitely labeling it as a hitter's park, so not necessarily going to do any favors, but you never know. Like with sometimes a change of scenery or a little bit a tweak here and there by our pitching coach, which is highly regarded by a lot of people, you know, he could be valuable. So I think if nothing else, he could safeguard us from injury, and I'd much rather have him than Aaron Wilkerson out there. However, I really don't want him stealing, you know, valuable innings. That if we are going to stick with Brandon Woodruff, that he should really get at the major league level in the last, you know, 2 months. But like I think if Davies does not come back from injury, Lyles, really what you're looking at is at some point, you know, Troy Peralta is not going to reach the innings limit. He's currently part of our starting five, so someone's going to have to slide in there and replace him. And I think people are expecting Davies to, but if he's not healthy, then we need another option, and it'd have to be Woodruff or Lyles most likely. And then you got Wade Miley, who's kind of a wild card. You know, so you'll have to, I don't know, there's definitely some room for possible innings, and I think it was a good depth move, if nothing else, by Stearns. And obviously for the price that we had to pay, and there's no complaints really.
I was going to say too, we didn't have to give up anything to acquire him. It's not like we had to go into our organizational depth and trade away a prospect for him. So yeah, essentially it's a no risk move. You know, we'll see if he's able to stick, or maybe the Brewers sat down and talked to Derek Johnson and seen maybe that he's got something he could correct. Who knows?
Yeah. No, speaking of, you know, overall, some of the acquisitions prior to the deadline, Surya, Masakis, Schoop, kind of keying in on how they're all doing. I mean, obviously Masakis, Schoop have not really hit very much since the acquisition. I think Surya is doing fairly well, but I just wanted to point out and get your guys' opinion on it. There was some scuttlebutt right as the trade happened, that how are the Brewers going to work this with that bat, getting all these guys on the field. And obviously one thing that during the past week, or his first week as a Brewer, Jonathan Schoop, I did believe get one start as our starting shortstop. And I don't know if that was an experiment, kind of like, or if that's something they're going to continue doing going forward. I guess my question to you guys is, what are your thoughts on that? And do you think, given everything considered, that Orlando Arcia's glove is just as important to us as the Brewers' infield defense? It's just as important to the team as basically Moustakas / Schoop's bat is at this point.
I mean, for me, I'm not really all that concerned about the guys getting their at bats, because I think that they will, and that stuff really does tend to play itself and work itself out. So I'm not overly worried about it. I think that Arcia, I've defended him for a long time. I think that he's a great defender, and I'm hopeful still that his bat is able to be turned around, whether that's this year or next year. I don't know. I do know that, you know, contending teams and playoff teams are usually teams that have a very strong bench. And if it's a matter of having a great bench hitter because we acquired Jonathan Schoop, and you've got either Travis Shaw or Schoop himself or Mike Moustakas coming off your bench later in a game for pinch hitting, I'm very okay with the depth, and I think that that's probably Stearns' mindset with that as well. So I do like Schoop more than I liked Jonathan VR. I think that Schoop is going to be a much better hitter than we saw the first week. I'm not going to freak out about a very small sample size, and I just tend to think, though, that depth more than anything is really good. And if Schoop ends up being a guy that comes off the bench later in games, he's a guy that hit over 30 home runs last year. I'm very, very content with having some decent power hitting options off of our bench, whether that be Moustakas, Braun, Schoop, or Moustakas. So I think that any one of those guys, or Travis Shaw, any one of those guys could be a huge lift for depth and bench overall.
Yeah, I remember when I was like way back in one of the first episodes we ever did in this, I was talking a little bit, and I was like, well, his team is really bad. Our team was really bad at the time. And I remember thinking, like, well, if we just did a platoon at third, and then, I don't know, maybe a platoon at first until Prince is ready, and then, I don't know, second, we might need a platoon. And everyone was like, yeah, you can't have that many platoons on a team. That doesn't work. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. It doesn't. But maybe I was a visionary, because 10 years later, like David Stearns is essentially having us like he is everybody able to play every position, so he's able to optimize what he can out of every hitting lineup. So apparently, yeah, we were geniuses back then. We just didn't know it. That's the takeaway.
Well, and I also think just like what we were just saying with the bullpen guys, like if you're Craig Counsell and you're making out a lineup card, I think that you do play matchups. You know, you've got certain guys that Eric Thames hits really well, and that Jesus Aguilar doesn't. You've got certain guys that Travis Shaw hits really well, and like Moustakas may not. So I think that you're going to see more matchups being played. I think that it's better overall because you're going to be able to give guys that day off when they need it. And more than anything, again, I think that having some power hitting options coming off of your bench, as the Brewers are working through their bullpen and making a lot of offensive substitutions going throughout a game, probably starting in the fifth or sixth inning with a weaker starting rotation than some other clubs. I think that bench becomes even more important for a team like the Brewers than it does for a team that has, several top of the rotation guys, so to speak. It just makes that bench all the more valuable.
Now, essentially, like we're kind of platooning our entire infield and our entire outfield in some ways. But the nice thing about that is, unconventional is that we're really safeguarded going into the final couple months stretch here. Safeguard the injury, because if there's an injury, basically any infielder or any outfielder, we kind of already have covered without having to dip into like an inexperienced minor leaguer or something like that. Like a Brett Phillips is not, there's an example from last year where you have to play or something like that. So we do have some nice experience and depth, and that could really come into play. To like challenge the waiver wire. But conversely, we're doing that exact strategy though. When we're mentioning Jordan Lyles with the starting pitching staff, which I don't know. I guess I have the opposite philosophy of Stearns, where I think that you can find serviceable guys out the waiver wire, offensive hitters, and not so much pitchers. So apparently, as the opposite philosophy, and hopefully it works out. But I have legitimate concerns about our starting pitching, especially with Nelson basically not being caught out at all this year, going into potential postseason or pennant chase or wild card race or whatever you want to call it. I think other Brewer fans are with me in that same concern.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think that fans have been correct in identifying the starting rotation as being an area that we'd like to upgrade. I think that when we're looking at who is available at the deadline, I'm not sure I would have pulled the trigger and given up any of our top prospects for guys who were available. I think that Stearns probably looked at the market and thought the same thing. And I tend to think that our starting pitching has overperformed, but I also think that our numbers stack up pretty decently compared to a lot of other teams in the league. And I don't think it's all smoke and mirrors. I do think that there's some talent in the rotation that maybe is just not as hyped or as heralded as other clubs. So I'm hopeful that we can still upgrade through the waiver process, and I certainly think we're going to upgrade over the offseason. But, as far as this year goes, I think essentially we need 4 decent starting pitchers just with the way that the schedule fits. The fifth starter I'm not as concerned about, except, if there's an injury.
All right, what's next on the docket?
All right, that was called dead air.
Yeah.
We can edit that.
No, we can't, but that's okay.
What?
Scott, that was your turn to say something, but I thought that's all right. If you dozed off a little bit, that's probably understandable. It's been a long day and you need a nap. That's fine.
I think you guys touched on it all. I mean, there's not like anybody right now in the infield or the outfield where I would be like, if they got injured and out for the year, you'd go, oh, season's over, because Stearns has done such a great job of accumulating depth, actually at the major league and the AAA level. I remember, our AAA was terrible for several years, but he's really done a good job.
And I think we also need to look at who's off the roster. I mean, that's really the question too, because we're not trading Travis Shaw right now. We're getting rid of guys like Brad Miller and Jonathan VR, and now Tyler Saladino is depth in AAA rather than on the major league roster. So I think that, again, the strength of the overall roster has been dramatically increased over the past, week and a half to 2 weeks after Stearns started making his deadline acquisition.
That's a great point. And I think other Brewer fans echo the fact that they're probably not going to miss Jonathan VR all that much, and think that Schoop is a big upgrade. But looking at numbers, and really as OPS, which a lot of people look at right now, I don't know how much better Jonathan Schoop is than Tyler Saladino. I hate to say it, but that's why I just don't get the upgrade at all. I just don't think it's that much of an upgrade. But
Schoop had
VR.
Yeah, Schoop had 30-plus bombs last year, though. I mean, I really think that power is going to play, and at some point it's going to come out at Miller Park. And don't forget, he's still under, team control for next season as well. So to me, it's, helping this season, but it's also helping next year. And if you get the 2017 version of Jonathan Schoop on, any level, that is definitely going to be better than what Tyler Saladino was able to provide, the past few months. No knock on him. I mean, Saladino was a great utility infielder for us, and he could still provide some depth for us in September after rosters expand. And that being said, I don't think that he overall is nearly as good of a player as Jonathan Schoop is.
Yeah, I really think this whole Schoop thing, why it seems like it was not really a need at the time. I honestly think that Stearns was doing his 2018-19 offseason work before the deadline, because I really think this was about solidifying a second baseman for next year on what will essentially be a one-year contract as his last year of arbitration eligibility. So he's basically will have Shaw back at third, Schoop as starting second baseman entering 2019. Obviously, Arcia probably at short unless they do something else with a signing or
Dubon.
And so I think he's kind of like doing his work ahead of time, and in doing such, he's also giving them the depth this season. To me, that's interesting and it's a decent strategy. I just think that, to me, it speaks that Stearns really thinks that is, thinking ahead, and I don't honestly think he's convinced that the Brewers have a team that is going to be able to go deep in the playoffs this year, and that move, something like that, working toward next year already.
Yeah, I disagree with that,
that
statement partially, Craig. I don't think that getting Schoop indicates that he believes that the Brewers don't have a team that can push into the playoffs a bit. I think that Schoop, like you said, it does help for next year, and I think that he's a perfect bridge guy to Keston Hiura, who we should see probably sometime next year, and probably will be our starter in 2020. And Schoop provides a guy that can definitely be a valuable second baseman in the meantime. And I don't think, though, that getting Jonathan Schoop indicates that the Brewers think that they don't have a chance to push in the playoffs this year. I don't believe that. I just will reiterate again that I don't think that the starting pitching that was available on the market this year was going to have that great of an effect on our playoff chances. I really don't think that it would have been worth it for the Brewers to trade, 3 top 10 guys to Tampa for Chris Archer. And I don't think that Cole Hamels would have waived his trade clause to come here without a huge financial commitment from the Brewers for 2019. And I think you can go down the list of available starting pitching and make that argument for just about everybody that was acquired by other teams at the deadline this year.
Yeah, I think overall, I see your point, Vince, that it's obviously he's not punting this year or anything, but my point is that he is not having a tunnel vision of just this year trying to make the playoffs because of the position we're in. He is trying to build a multi-year, looking at several years at a time, and that's why he acquired someone that was not just a rental. I just think it was a mistake. I don't even think Jonathan Schoop will be worth his contract that will be owed through arbitration next year, which will probably be in the range of $12 million. I think he could have done better if he wanted to bridge something to Keston Hiura, which I'm sure is the case since he didn't, give him up via trade. That we could have signed the second baseman next year to fill in until that happened. But a lot of Brewer fans are clamoring to have Keston Hiura, our future Hall of Famer or whatever, up already this year in the pennant race, which again I think would have been a mistake and was rushing him. So I do think he'll be ready by about mid-season next year, though.
Yeah, I do too.
And so we'll have Schoop though. So again, that'll allow him to slowly break here in off the bench or whatever. And in the meantime, we've got Schoop for next year, and that's it. So we shall see. I hope.
We got all this competition, though, at all these different positions because, I mean, how many times – I mean, even this year, we've had so many people play second or short that were terrible. And we've also had people like, Eric Sogard that was great last year and then was terrible this year. And we kind of got caught with our pants down a little bit with it because we didn't have a plan B, or plan B was just as bad as plan A, and plan C and D were awful too. So at least now, if these guys don't come around a little bit, like Dubon or Herrera, like if they don't adjust to Major League pitching, in the way that they want to, well, that's fine. Then we can ease them into that role, and then at least we have Major League talent, to help them out.
And let's not forget, too, that second base has been kind of a black hole for the Brewers ever since David Stearns took over as GM. He may have made a mistake, and maybe his biggest mistake, in just getting rid of Scooter Gannett in place of Jonathan VR going into the 2017 season. And obviously something was going on with VR where the Brewers leadership just did not trust him anymore. And he was taken out essentially for Eric Sogard at one point last season. He had, it seems like we continue to bring guys in to spell him. Like we took a flyer on Brad Miller. We got Saladino from the White Sox. It's like we got Neil Walker last year at the deadline. We're always trying to get somebody else besides Jonathan VR into that role. And I think there was a reason for that. So again, if you're going to look at guys that Stearns clearly was unhappy with having on the team, and I would assume counsel as well. I don't know if there was a clubhouse issue or if it was his play on the field or if it was his mental lapses as a base runner, whatever it was. Something was not clicking for Jonathan VR with this Brewers management. And I think that more than anything else, getting Schoop was a way to say, okay, we found a guy that we can trust at least to play competent second base, and Jonathan VR was not going to be that guy for both the last couple of months of this year and then next year until Hero is ready as well.
What was clicking on the field for Jonathan VR the last year and a half? I mean, not base running, not fielding, not hitting. So there's not much left, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, he had a bit of pop, and that was about it. He could steal bases in 2016, but you got to get on base to steal bases. And I think that was really the issue that he faced. And you really saw that last year. And I'm sure that looking back on it, the Brewers regret just giving up Scooter Gannett for nothing to the Reds, who now is an all-star second baseman, which for them. But, it is what it is. So I think that this is the attempt. I noticed that on Baseball Reference, where they do the player comparisons and most similar batters through ages, the number one similar batter to Jonathan Schoop is Scooter Gannett. I thought that was pretty funny.
Awesome. Well, guys, we got about 30 seconds here. So what do you want to do? Wrap this up maybe?
Yeah, let's wrap this up. And thanks for listening, everybody. Remember to send us your emails. We'll get to those on our next podcast. Brew Crew Review Podcast with an S at gmail.com, or hit us up on Twitter at Brew Crew Review 1. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our Insight Anonymous source, Tom Carter, for all the insights. And,
thanks, Tom Carter.
TC. All right, thanks for listening, guys.
Yep, thanks, everybody.
Go Brewers.
Go
Brewers.